My name is Dave Brant. I graduated from Indiana State University with a master's in criminology in 1975. I left here and I went to Miami, Florida, where I was a police officer for a couple years. In 1977, I joined what was then the Naval Investigative Service and is more commonly known today as the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS. I served there from 1977 until 2005, almost 29 years. Held several positions during my career, and I was the head of the agency, the director of NCIS, from 1997 until I retired in 2005. In 2005, from 2005 until approximately 2017, I served at two of the largest accounting firms in the world. I was 5 years at Deloitte and 6 years at BDO, the first and fifth largest accounting firms in the world. And during my employment at those two accounting firms, I was deeply involved in leading consulting practices serving law enforcement. In June of 2017, I accepted the position as the Chief Operating Officer of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund and the Executive Director of the soon-to-open, only of its kind, first National Law Enforcement Museum, which will open in the fall of this year. I did my undergraduate work at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. I got an undergraduate degree in psychology. And during my senior year, actually, I took a couple classes that were criminal justice classes. And I became really interested in the topic and really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Post-undergraduate, I knew I was interested in law enforcement. Did some research. In those days, there was no internet, so I literally had to find out through libraries and things of that nature and making phone calls. And I learned that Indiana State in the mid-70s was one of the few criminology programs in the country. The others that came to mind that I recall, or come to mind as I recall, were Michigan State, Florida State, and there may have been a few others scattered around the country. But at that period of time, criminal justice was not a highly sought after particular graduate level degree. So I did some research relatively close to where I grew up, which was in central Illinois. Liked what I saw, applied, and was accepted, and thrilled about coming here. As I mentioned, the latter part of my undergraduate time, I did become interested in law enforcement. Wasn't quite sure in those years exactly what that would translate into, because it was an era of things like Police Story and Miami Vice, and shows like that were big hits on television, something you would never even remotely recall. But I was interested in law enforcement. I didn't have any history in my family involved in law enforcement, but I just found it at that young age to be the type of career, the excitement, the opportunity to serve and help others was attractive, and my interest was piqued a bit in my senior year in undergrad, and as I mentioned, learned a bit about the criminology program at Indiana State and decided I wanted to go further and see where I could go in that field. Well, obviously at the time I was here working on my master's, the instructors here, the further introduction and the exposure to law enforcement motivated me further to get into that field. And I made a decision at some point in time that I didn't want to continue for higher education. I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to research. I really wanted to sort of, quote, be on the streets. And I moved towards police officer. And while I was here, just started doing research on the police departments at the time, and again, this is the mid-70s, that actually recognized advanced degree in criminology. And there were a few around the country that paid any more salary if you had an undergraduate or a graduate degree. Some did. And I started applying to those schools based on my experience here and, again, continued interest in law enforcement. Ended up, I went to Miami-Dade Public Safety Department in Miami, Florida, Dade County, Florida, and was a police officer there. Exciting times, mid-70s. Learned a lot. I grew up in the Midwest, had not come from the city, so I was exposed to a whole nother lifestyle and unique way of living, and being a police officer in Miami in the mid-70s was an exciting, impacting, and adventurous experience. Because I had a master's degree from Indiana State in criminology, I wanted to go to the federal level. That was my next career objective. So I started applying to federal agencies, FBI, DEA, Secret Service, sort of the commonly known law enforcement agencies at the federal level. Actually, the head of the criminology department here, Dr. Nardini, at the time, told me of an organization that I'd never heard of. And at the time, as I mentioned earlier, they were known as Office of Naval Intelligence, Naval Investigative Service. The mission of the agency was to conduct criminal felony-level investigations and support counterintelligence matters for the Department of the Navy. He told me I should look into them. They were potentially hiring, unique organization, hired civilians, et cetera, et cetera. He had told me that before I graduated. After I graduated, I went to be a police officer. While I was a police officer in Miami, I continued to stay in touch with that organization, NIS. Liked them, was intrigued by them, applied to NIS, applied to DEA, applied to State Department, applied to FBI, applied to Secret Service, and NIS and the State Department and DEA all approached me at the same time about a position. I accepted a job with NIS, and that was in January of 1977, and I spent 29 years there. And it was a phenomenal experience, opportunity, honor. I had every job that that organization affords. I served overseas. I served undercover. I worked every category of criminal investigation probably that exists. And ultimately, in 1997, became the director of the organization. I was director from 97 to 2005 during a turbulent time in our country where, during my tenure, the terrorist attack on USS Cole took place 12 October 2000, which really signaled the beginning of the war on terror as we know it. I was also head of the agency on 9/11, and as tragic as those events were, it was an honor for me to serve and our organization to play a small part in trying to counter that threat. So I spent most of my professional career at NCIS. I was also there when the NCIS, the TV show, started. I had a starring role on that show in November 2005. I helped the producers actually put the outline of the show together and sort of determine what it should be. Post-government, I left and went to consulting firm Deloitte. I spent 5 years there, where I was the head of the Department of Justice account. I spent 6 years at another accounting firm, BDO, fifth largest in the country, where I was the head of the public sector. And in both those jobs at Deloitte and BDO, a lot of our work was consulting to law enforcement. So I spent a lot of time with senior leadership at both federal, state, and local agencies, helping them establish some critical mission elements and develop where they wanted to go as an organization, et cetera. And currently, in June of 2017, I accepted a position as the head of the National Law Enforcement Museum, executive director, a museum that there's nothing like, and will open in the fall of this year. And it will be the story of American law enforcement, and will provide approximately 500,000 visitors a year the opportunity to walk in the shoes of a law enforcement professional and see and understand the complexities associated with the profession. A favorite memory from ISU. I got married halfway through my graduate years, and my wife, who was going to, in her graduate program at the University of Illinois, decided to join me here at Indiana State, so I recruited and brought in another student to ISU. Actually, the best memory of working or attending school during that time was the criminology department was a very small, very students get to know professors on a very personal basis. And as I mentioned earlier, the chair of the department is actually the linkage chair of the department at the time that put me on the career path that allowed me to go to NCIS and ultimately became the director. So I think that the highlight was just the interactions that I would have as a young student with professors who had spent decades in the field and the guidance and insight that they were able to provide me and I took with me when I left. Well, I think one of the reasons is your history, the history of the school, which as I mentioned in my own career back in the middle 70s when I was still in school, Indiana State was one of the few that offered a criminology, criminal justice major. And so I know in the ensuing 43 years since I was here, Indiana State as one of the foundational universities that established that program has become known and as one of the best and with a reputation that reflects that. And I know the students here will get the same kind of individual treatment from a group of teachers and professors that care about them and their future. And I know based on what I achieved 40-some years ago and then the years post-graduating, it's a real opportunity to take a criminal justice or criminology academic background and really impact in the field, regardless of what direction you choose to go to as a student. Listen to the experiences of others, listen to your professors, learn from everyone you encounter, take from those who've been there, done it, and apply it to your own objectives. Build a network. Law enforcement's a people-centric field. Law enforcement doesn't produce widgets, we don't produce products. So your ability to create relationships and leverage those relationships and pull from folks as to their histories and how that might apply to where you want to go and what your career objectives are is very important. So learn, listen, and build a network. Never hesitate to ask questions from those who've had experiences in areas where you want to go in your own career. I literally owe where I was able to serve and the positions I was able to hold in law enforcement. I literally owe a debt of gratitude to not only the school for giving me an academic background to do what I was able to do, but also the professors here. And as I mentioned, were it not for the chair of the criminology department when I was here, I would have never probably made the connections that I made that allow me to learn about agencies and apply and ultimately get positions that allowed me to have a great career. Thank you.